we're going to spend the next time together learning from our guest, and I want to give him a formal introduction, and then we'll bring him on and have him share his story and his expertise with us. So, John, I appreciate you. First time dancing in the rain with Iron Man suit on. I love that. Thank you for being here with us. So listen, our guest today is the CEO of AQR International, which was founded in 1989. And AQR works in over 80 plus countries around the world. In his recent years, he worked with Professor Peter Clough and Dr. John Perry to define what we're going to be talking about today as mental toughness, and to create, now watch this, and to create the world's leading measure of mental toughness. Friends, do you realize that we can measure mental toughness? That's what our guest is here to talk about to us today. He is now recognized as a leading authority on the application of mental toughness to the worlds of work, education, sports, health, as well as social applications. And I'm going to introduce him by his first name because I don't want to disrespect his last name, and then I'm going to have him pronounce his last name for us. Will you please show some love for our guest in the house, Doug? Doug, come on and tell us your last name, please.
Okay, Jeff. Well, welcome to everyone. I was rather hoping you'd pronounce it so I'd know how to pronounce it.
You're going to have to help me. I've been trying to practice all day,
right.
Doug, and I don't know that I could do you any justice on that. So
it's a Polish name, and even in Poland, it's a mouthful. So it's pronounced Strycharczyk. And fortunately, my parents gave me Doug or Douglas as a first name, so that helps out.
Yes. And how many times did you have to say that when you were growing up, right?
When I was young, it was really interesting because I got quite embarrassed about my surname. Now it's the other way around. I'm really quite proud about my surname. It really kind of, I can go to a hotel with a booking and nobody would have forgotten about my booking. I feel for all the Smiths in the world, but I'm okay.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Well, we are very honored to have you here. You and I found one another on LinkedIn. I began to read about your work in this subject of mental toughness. So I'm very excited for you to be able to share your knowledge with us today. I wondered before we get to that, if you might tell us a high level of your own story, kind of what led you to this particular topic in work, maybe any challenges that you've experienced along the way, and then maybe how you were able to apply that mental toughness to overcome those. Do you mind sharing with us a little bit? Help us to get to know you for a moment.
No, by all means. No, because it's a story that's common. You mentioned Professor Peter Clough and Dr. John Perry. The one thing that's unites all three of us is we are where we are. We've developed a great deal of expertise that's recognized around the world, but we didn't start there. We are all from what you would call very working class backgrounds. We were all from what would nowadays be described as underprivileged backgrounds. And my parents were refugees after the Second World War who turned up in Scotland, basically couldn't speak the language, took in sewing to sort of make their way. I was born. But one of the things that struck me is no matter how difficult life was for my parents, they were never, ever unhappy. The atmosphere in our house was always positive. And then, like a lot of immigrants, they valued education. And so I was encouraged to do well when I was at school. And I did do well. And at the age of 11, I won a scholarship to one of the better schools in our area. At that point, I had two very, very close friends who were every bit as bright as I was. They didn't win a scholarship, and they ended up going to, I would say, a much more modest school. And I've wondered all my life about how did I get to where I was, and why couldn't they make that same journey? And the conclusion I've come to is there was something inside me, something about my mental approach that had been developed and supported by my family that helped me to get me to where I am. And it's the same with Peter Clough. Peter Clough's mother, would you believe, was a gypsy who made a living telling fortunes. Now, that's one hell of a background for a psychologist. And his father was a coal miner. And yet, 25 years after he's born, he achieves the status of a professor in a major university in the UK. So there is something about that journey, and it makes you wonder, why me? Why not others? Because if I can understand why it happened for me, maybe I can help other people. And that's been a major motivation in our work. And then you said, can I think of something that happened to me in my personal life? Well, I didn't know the backstory to circles, but in 2005, I was diagnosed with stage 3 bowel cancer. And the medics who were looking after me told my wife that I had a 30% chance of surviving 5 years. Well, it's been a lot more than 5 years, and I think I'm still here. You're not imagining this.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
But one of the things that helped me was my knowledge about mental toughness, my knowledge about being able to use my mind to optimize my situation. Now, that's a very key phrase in our work. We talk about optimizing. We talk about everyone being the best version of themselves that they can be. This is not about being the winner. This is about everybody having a chance to prosper, to thrive in their own way. And so what I've learned over the last 30 years, because this has been a big part of my life, once I discovered what mental toughness was, I've learned to not be judgmental, if you can understand what I mean. And that it's been like taking the scales off my eyes. You just suddenly realize that a lot of the things you believed in, a lot of the interventions you thought worked for everyone, don't actually work for everyone. And so, that's an answer to your opening question, Jeff.
Yes, so well said, Doug. Thank you for sharing. I'm always fascinated. You said something, it reminded me, we just had a young guest on just this last week who is diagnosed with lymphoma stage 2. And she's young, in her 20s. And when she got that diagnosis, she had made the comment that, yes, although she was scared at first, she went inward and decided, this is not how my story ends. Would that be an example of mental toughness? Maybe you could expound on that a little bit for us, Doug?
Oh, it is very much so. I mean, in a moment, we'll talk about what mental toughness is and what are the components. And it's really important to understand that. But one of those components is something we call life control, and it's where the sense of self-worth sits. And it's, I suppose, colloquially, it's where the sense of can-do sits. So when things happen to us, some of us will say, oh, okay, I'm not going to let that beat me. I think I can do it. I think I can rise to the occasion. Others, with exactly the same background, same qualifications, experience, knowledge, etc., will respond mentally in a different way. They'll give up. They'll say, I'm not in sufficient control. The world's conspired against me. I'm defeated. The only difference between those two individuals is what's going on in their heads. Everything else could be exactly the same. So your mental approach to events is critically important. And just sort of looping back to picking up about the story you've just given me, I've got to tell you about one moment that's happened. It's about 6-7 months ago. And it gave me goosebumps. It gives me goosebumps every time I talk about it. Most of my work is in the world of work, helping organizations look after the well-being of their employees, help them to perform better. We do an awful lot in the world of education. We do a lot in the world of health, and we do a lot in the world of sport. But about 9 months ago, 2 doctors from, I need to be careful about what I say here, from Iran got in touch. We were really surprised. And they said, we run a hospital for children with leukemia. And they said, we've had a problem or a challenge for some time. The parents of the children obviously are quite distressed. They feel very pressured, and they don't always respond optimally to the situation. And you can understand why. And we thought we've got to do something about it. So they looked at a number of approaches, and they picked up our mental toughness concept and some of the work around that. And they decided to experiment with it. And they were really pleased to see that they were able to operationalize it, and they were able to help the parents to become calmer about the situation. And what they said was, as the parents became calmer, so did the children. And they thought, well, that's a bonus. We were really trying to help the parents. It turns out we are also helping the children. And then they noticed the treatments began to become more effective. And when he told us that, I just thought, this is, I can't imagine at the start of my life, and the start of my career, I would ever be having this conversation with anyone. I mean, even now, telling you now, I've got goosebumps talking about it, because it was just such a surprise, and it just kind of added something to our work. The idea that some of the stuff that we've been doing can have this kind of impact on people that I've never met. I didn't, and I'm unlikely ever to meet.
Yes. You remind me of a quote. I believe Nietzsche is credited that if you find the why for living, you can endure almost anyhow. Sounds like what we're talking about, yes?
Absolutely. Oh, I didn't know about that quote. I shall look it up, because we talk about mental toughness is answering the why question, not the what question. And so this is perfectly resonant.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to let you take the platform here. You have so much in your heart to share. You have so much experience. Take us through mental toughness, what it is. Help us understand it to a greater degree. It's all yours. Share with us.
Well, I'm sat here. It's 20 past midnight in the UK, and I'm addressing a lot of people in the States. And that's slightly bizarre, because mental toughness, the term, was born in the United States, and it was developed originally by a sports coach and sports psychologist called Jim Lohr, who realized when he was working with athletes, and he was working with some elite athletes, that if he attended to their minds as much as he attended to their body and their techniques, he could create people who performed exceptionally. And so in one sense, the idea is, or the term certainly originates much closer to you than it is to me. But for those of you who think, oh, Doug's about to talk about a brand new concept, it's the oldest new concept you'll come across, because the first reference to mental toughness, first written reference, comes from Plato, the Greek philosopher, 2,500 years ago. And he called it fortitude. And he understood, as his fellow philosophers understood, that life had its ups and downs, but if you adopted a certain mental approach to that, then you could not only survive, but you could thrive. And then 500 years or so later, in the Roman era, you find the Stoics who come along, and they are, I suppose, disciples of Plato, and they pick up this notion that, yes, life can be pretty rotten at times, but if you grit your teeth and you think more positively, you can get through this. And that gives you a flavor of what mental toughness might be about. So what we know is that we have always known, for thousands of years, probably before Plato, we've always known that this idea of fortitude, of stoicism, is really important. It can help us to get through life. The problem is that we've only ever known it at quite a high level. we've never known exactly what it is. And if we don't know what it is, it's very difficult to operationalize and to use it. Well, I'm very, very, very fortunate. About 35 years ago, I recruited a young psychologist, Peter Clough, to come and work with me in my company. He stayed for about 3 years, and then he went into academia to research. And the area he wanted to research was mental toughness. But by then we'd become friends, and I collaborated with him. I helped him with aspects of his research, particularly in widening the application beyond the world of sport, because that's what he was predominantly interested in. And bit by bit, he began to get under the skin of what the mental toughness concept was. And again, some of that is due to an American psychologist called Suzanne Cabasa, who's from California, who understood that resilience was important, but actually there was more to your mindset than just resilience. Resilience was only part of the picture. There was another part of the picture, and you needed both parts to optimize. And so she came up with some ideas. Peter was able to seize upon them, and he created what's now called the 4 C's model of mental toughness. He published this in 2002, and then for the next 21 years, it's completely dominated my life. The 4 C's are control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. And those are the 4 pillars on which mental toughness is based. They're 4 constructs, so they're 4 concepts in their own right, but they come together to create this concept of mental toughness. Now, how do John Perry and I fit into this? Well, Peter, in a sense, got to this level, but then myself and others started to work out how to apply it, how to put it into the hands of the people who are listening to this session.
Yes.
So, well, what we found is we were able to create a kind of a measure, create some approaches with what we knew. And I can honestly say for the last 21 years, it's just been an explosion of knowledge. We now know so much that we didn't know 21 years ago. We know how to understand the concept to a greater level of detail, which hopefully we'll explain in a moment. But we've also learned some really important things. Mental toughness is a scale, it's a spectrum. At one end, you've got mental toughness. At the other end, you've got mental sensitivity. All things being equal, being mentally tough has some advantages over being mentally sensitive, but not always. It is perfectly possible to be mentally tough and to really screw things up. It is perfectly possible to be mentally sensitive and to thrive, to be as successful as anyone else. So there's an important message there. We come across so many models in the world of people and organizational development that are black and white. They talk about good and bad. And there are other models in this sort of area of mindset that give you that impression. What we're learning is the mental toughness is an aspect of your personality. We're grateful to the University of Western Ontario. They picked up some of our work and they were able to demonstrate it is a facet of our personality. But it's a different facet to the facet that most of us understand. Now, most of us, when we talk about personality, which is our default response to events, are actually only talking about our default actions. So how do we act? How do we behave when things happen to us or around us? But that behavior has to come from somewhere. And what we're beginning to learn is that the first response, there's the response that influences behavior, is not our actions, but our thoughts. So there's an aspect of personality which is down to our default thought response to events. And that's what mental toughness is. So we know that the definition for mental toughness is it explains our mental responses to stress, pressure, challenge, opportunity. These are just the features of everyday life for most of us. And the interesting thing, it's irrespective of circumstances. So that's another thing that distinguishes it from behavior. because behavior can be very situational. We know we can behave differently at home than at work, but mental toughness is much less situational. So if something annoys us at work, it'll annoy us at home. But we might behave differently, but our thoughts are still the same. So most of the work in the last 20 years has been driven towards, well, what is this thing? And what we now know is it consists of these four big elements, these four constructs, but underneath that, there are 8 factors, and they are independent of each other. So if you can best bear with me, I'm just going to briefly describe what these 8 factors are. And you can think of them as these are your mental responses. Now, I might use some behavioral language, but that's to be able to illustrate its impact or its influence on our behaviors. So the first of the constructs is control. And control basically is describing the extent to which we believe in our heads that we have sufficient control of ourselves, our environment, and our circumstances to be able to achieve most of what we need to achieve. So it's about sufficient control. It's not about total control. And it's got 2 elements, 2 factors. The first one is life control, which I touched upon briefly before, and that is where the sense of self-worth sits. So it's describing the extent to which I believe I have in my mind a picture of myself as a worthwhile person, a person who, if somebody asks me to do something, I will give it a go because I believe in myself sufficiently to give it a go. Now, some people will, some people will try, but others, the more mentally sensitive in this regard, will shy away from it. And typically the kind of responses you might get from those people would not be, right, I'll give it a go. It'll be, well, I might, I could, I would if. And they start using conditional language, sometimes negative language. They might just overtly say, oh, I don't think I can do it, when they may well be perfectly capable of doing it. And the only thing holding them back is what's happening in their head. The second of the factors is something we call emotional control. It's probably more accurate to call it emotional management, because we all experience emotions, but some of us are capable of managing emotional responses. Now, that might mean masking our emotional responses if it's important for us to do that. And for some people, it is important to do that. It also might mean channeling our emotions for a more positive end. So in the world of sport, you very often see sports coaches talking to their athletes saying, look, you're angry, channel that anger into your performance. Don't, apply it to other people. But some people haven't got that ability. They reveal their emotional states to others. If you'll see quite plainly that they are, distressed or fearful or maybe even happy. So they reveal their emotional states to others. And sometimes, well, in a lot of cases, they'll allow their emotions to dictate their responses. So their emotions will influence their decisions and what they do. And again, that mightn't be optimal. So that's the control element.
Okay. I just want to pause. We've got some questions in the chat, Doug, just for a second.
Sure.
Alex is asking, what was the first control one? Can you had said that there was something about control, and I believe you alluded to that something about it sits in the seat. Explain that for us one more time, Doug.
Well, the life control.
Yes, life control.
Well, life control is broadly what we mean by a sense of self-worth. If I'm asked to do something, if I've got a high level of self-worth, my immediate response will be something like, yeah, just leave it with me. I'll get on with it. I'll try. And so your default response is, because you really believe in yourself, you don't necessarily believe that you've got the abilities to do it. You just believe in you. You'll have a go. At the other end of the scale, people who might have every piece of skill and every piece of knowledge that's required to do something, they might still doubt themselves sufficiently to say, I'm not sure I can do that. So that's what that scale measures. Is that clear for everyone?
It is. Thank you so much. Those of you that are just joining us, we have been deep diving into the subject of mental toughness. Our guest today is the CEO of AQR International, founded in 1989 and works in over 80 plus countries. He shared his personal story of growing up with immigrant parents, living in less than ideal conditions, and finding, in my own term, would be this magic formula. I know that's not the proper way to say it, but this something that resides within us that causes us to be able to overcome these difficulties that we face in life. Now, I don't want to take you too far off of where you're at, Doug, because I want to drill down into more, but I wonder if you would touch on something for me. Anybody else in the listening audience may have the thought, are we born with mental toughness, or is it something that we can actually acquire and learn as a skill? If I'm not taking you too far off of where you're at, Doug, on your journey to explaining this stuff with us, what are your thoughts on that? Is it a learned behavior, or is it simply a part of us that we were born with?
No, it's a good question, and we do have an answer because thanks to the University of Western Ontario, they did some work on the extent to which there's a genetic influence, and they found there is about 55% roughly, it's plucking figures out of the air, of our mental toughness is of genetic origin. The rest is experiential or environmental. It's shaped by our life's experiences. And that can take us into a whole other conversation, Jeff, because we're beginning to do more and more work with parents and children, between the ages of 3 and 9, because if you can impact on children at that age, you can actually change their lives forever. So, we learn a lot of our mental toughness in those early formative years. Because 45% is experiential, it means we've learned it. It means we can unlearn it and we can relearn it. So the good news is we can do something about our level of mental toughness if we want to.
Yeah, I think that's so well said, Doug. I know in my own personal journey, I grew up, I never knew that mental toughness, if you would, was up to me. My mental toughness was directed by my father. You're going to do it because I tell you you're going to do it. And when I told him no, he said, no, you're going to go do it. I don't know if that was a part of my own development of mental toughness, but it sure set me on a course to where almost to the damaging side was a perfectionistic attitude that I developed along the way, Doug, but a deep down inside myself determination that, hey, if it's possible and I'm still breathing, that makes it possible for me. So even though I was born in this condition, I grew up with this set of influence, or without parents, with parents, it doesn't matter the circumstances. I too am fascinated with what you're explaining, that we run into people all day long that were born in the quote unquote worst of conditions and they excel. And then others who are growing up in the best of conditions and who struggle. And I think what you just said was that choice is still up to us. We need to be able to set our intentions on being stronger in our mental toughness area. Yes, it's not going to just fall up in our lap, is it?
No, you're absolutely right. And the phrase, it's partly up to us. Sometimes us or we need a helping hand. So I'll give you a little example. In the UK, we work in areas of social deprivation, as well as working with some of the biggest companies on the planet. And I live in a very nice part of the country. It's Cheshire. 70% of young people in Cheshire go on to higher or further education after high school. That's above the national average, and the national average is about 55%. About 50 miles from where I am, there's an area of East Lancashire, and in that area, it's a former seaside town that has now seen very hard times. the proportion of young people that go on to further and higher education is 3%. There's only 50 miles of difference between us. But if you were to talk to young people, just walk up to young people in Cheshire and stop them in the street, they would have an optimistic picture of their future. They would have a belief in themselves that there's the world out there, and they're going to play their part in it. You'll go to this part, this deprived part of the world, and everybody thinks that's not for me. I'm doomed. This is my life. And yet you can do something about it. There's no difference between the makeup of the brain of the people in those two areas. And so it is possible to do something, but they need a helping hand, which is where counselors and therapists come in, of course.
Yes. And I know many people that are part. I've led many groups here on the Circles app. I've been in grief and crisis counseling, especially at end of life at the hospice and palliative care, and being able to have conversations about where somebody's at mentally. How are they finding the strength? What's been fascinating in my journey has been able to find how someone with the knowledge that their lifespan is, we're talking days or weeks, can yet find places of deep peace, Doug, and deep resonance to where they are not bothered. They just go someplace in their mind that is beautifully to witness. So we see that in athletes who apply mental toughness to excel in whatever their sport is as well, right? So
yes, but we also see lots of athletes who have got major mental health issues. So in the UK, we've got the swimmer PT, who for the last 6 or 7 years hasn't lost a race, but he's had to take 6 months off because of mental health problems. He's won gold medals, he's won world championships, but now he's put his hand up and he said, it's been worthwhile, but it's also been a horror journey. So we're just so many different kinds of people, and that's something that's fundamentally important to understand. We talk about. It's interesting that you asked the question about with superhero. My favorite superhero, because he illustrates the importance of mental toughness, is Spider-Man. Spider-Man, without his cloak, is a meek, timid, too frightened to chat up his girlfriend person. Puts a cloak on, and suddenly is a completely different set of behaviors, but inside is still that same person. And it gives you a clue about one of the approaches for developing mental toughness. What you can either change, or you can learn how to cope with who you are. And learning how to cope is about putting that cloak on.
Yes.
But I'm just conscious of our time. Perhaps I'll just nip into the other 3 factors.
Please go right ahead. Thank you for deviating on our journey. Go right ahead.
Yeah. So the second of the major elements is something we call commitment. And originally we thought that was just about stickability. But again, I'm very proud of this. Myself and John Perry initiated a lot of the research around this. And what we found is it consists of 2 factors. One is something we call goal orientation. And what that means is some of us understand our purpose. We have a purpose. We understand what we need to achieve. We can visualize it. So this is about visualization. Quite a few of us, but roughly the same number, because this is all normally distributed, don't have that sense. We can be described as aimless. We don't have a sense of purpose. We don't have a picture of what we need to achieve in our lives and what's important for us. So this idea of goal orientation sits there. The problem with goal orientation is that it's perfectly possible to have a picture of where you want to go and then do nothing about it. So the second factor is achievement orientation. And that's really describing the extent to which you are mentally prepared to make the effort to get to where you need to be. And it is perfectly possible to have a sense of purpose and not make the effort. And funnily enough, it's perfectly possible to have no sense of purpose, but when somebody provides that for you, or shows you their sense of purpose, you can move heaven and earth to achieve somebody else's purpose. So it's an interesting sort of dynamic there. Now, those two elements that I've described, control and commitment, are broadly what psychologists call resilience. Now, a lot of people, when they listen to me, they say, oh, aren't you just talking about resilience? Well, to some extent, I am. And resilience is simply the ability to respond to an adverse situation. It doesn't mean that you do that willingly or with enthusiasm. You are just picking yourself up, dusting yourself off because something's gone wrong. And if you have a sense of control, you think you can still do it. If you have a sense of commitment, you still want to achieve some or all of what you were originally intended to achieve. Now, I mentioned Suzanne Cabasa before because she was working with successful people in organizations in California. And she originally thought, well, resilience is the magic ingredient. And she kind of discovered that. But then to her surprise, she found there was something else going on as well. Not only were more successful people resilient, but they also deliberately put their resilience into play. In other words, they would look at the world around them and ahead of them and say, well, I don't know what's out there, but I'm going to take it on. And she called that quality challenge. And what we've been able to do is to be able to understand that to a deeper level. And challenge consists of two factors. The first one we call it risk orientation, but it isn't about taking reckless risks. What it is describing the extent to which you see the world around you and ahead of you as full of opportunity or full of threat. So it's very difficult to see the world in front of you. You know, hardly anybody listening to this will be able to say with any certainty what they'll be doing in 5 years' time. But what you will be able to do is, in your head, you'll say, I don't know what will happen in 5 years' time, but actually I'm going to enjoy getting there. You know, I'm going to be excited about what I discover. I might put myself at risk at times. I might take chances, but it's going to be worth it because I'm going to discover things that I've not yet seen. Whereas other people, when they look at that same situation, will say, oh, I don't really want to change anything. I want to stay as I am. I'd rather not see the world ahead of me because I think it's going to be more threatening than optimistic. And then coupled with that is what I call the beating heart of the whole mental toughness concept, and that is learning orientation. And this is describing the extent to which people reflect on what happens to them, their failures, as well as their successes, but more especially their failures, and the extent to which they learn from all those experiences and from the experiences of people around them. And we will all know that there are people who will go through life and they will completely ignore everything that happens. And they're the kind of people that would, they don't really want to face up to, some of their mistakes, some of their failures, and they find that they end up repeating their mistakes and repeating their failures, and life for them can become quite difficult. On the other hand, you get people who are very reflective. Something happens, they say, well, that didn't go well, but I'm going to learn something from that. I'm going to do it better next time. And so those two components, risk orientation and learning orientation, they go together. Now, what they're doing is bringing optimism, an optimistic approach to the mental toughness concept. So resilience is kind of a neutral, it's a backward-looking concept. What we're now looking at is positivity. What we're saying is, well, there's a world ahead of us, and we can either approach it with optimism and positivity, or we can approach it with trepidation and fear. And then the final component of the mental toughness concept is, and it's not going to surprise anyone, but it did surprise the researchers, is confidence. And confidence is a little bit like life control, except it's talking about the extent to which you believe in your abilities to deal with whatever is thrown at you. And again, this is bringing another component of positivity and optimism into the picture. And that has two elements. One is confidence and abilities. And this is the bit that always intrigues me. You can have extremely able people people who know a lot, who are incredibly skilled. And when it comes to the crunch, they can sometimes say, well, they can often say, I don't think I know enough, or I don't think I'm skilled enough. And they'll back off using their skills. So if they don't believe in their skills, they may as well never have had the skills in the first place. Mm. And you see that at every stage in life. You see it with children in school, you see it with students in universities, you see it with adults who have got abilities. And the thing that intrigues me is we've all got abilities, and yet some of us will downplay our own abilities to the point that they become almost worthless to us. And then the final component, the final one of the 8 components, is interpersonal confidence. And that is, I suppose it's another form of confidence and abilities, but we separate it out because the original thought was, it was describing a form of assertiveness, that you're going to assert your position in the world around you. But actually, it's more subtle than that. It's about the extent to which you are prepared to engage with other people. And there's nothing you can do in life that you can do entirely on your own. So engaging with people is an important activity. And you engage with people, you can engage with people in order to influence them. But you often also engage with people to learn from them, engage with people to get their support for what you do. And probably the most important manifestation is to be able to ask questions. You learn so much from the people around you. And you don't have to learn everything yourself. You can learn through others, through and from others. So I've kind of accelerated drawing the picture of the 8 factors, but those are the 8 aspects. Now, the significant thing about those 8 factors, and this is where we have more than 250 peer-reviewed research papers which confirm and support the concept, is they're all independent of each other. And what that means is that at the very basic level, there are 40,320 potential combinations of those 8 factors. And if you take into account different levels of each of those factors, there are millions of potential combinations. Now, in developing people and working with people, this is a really important, I'm going to call it a breakthrough, but we've known that this is important for a long time. We tend to deal with people as types, describe them in terms of colours, 4-letter combinations, and so on. We're actually much more individual than that. We're subtly individual. We are quite unique, and we need to understand that uniqueness. What we've got in the mental toughness concept is the ability to get close to understanding how different we are and how unique we are. And so going back all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, if we can understand why some people respond one way to an event and other people with exactly the same background respond in another way, then maybe we can help people who need that kind of help to prosper as much as anybody else. And I think that's where we're getting to now. We're beginning to understand that we're not judging people. The fact that you might be mentally tough or mentally sensitive, we're not making a judgment. That's simply who you are. The idea of self-awareness is to help you to understand who you are, and from that to say, or to ask the question, do you want to change, or do you want to learn how to deal with who you are in the world that you have to live in? And so we're getting to a position where we are able to creating that level of self-awareness is fundamentally important. You can't really develop people if they don't understand what needs to be developed. So we're getting to that kind of level of understanding now.
Yeah. I want everybody to just pause and just kind of sit in that for a moment. We've got some hands in the air that are going to ask some questions, if you're okay with taking a couple of questions.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to make sure that we talk before we close about a work where people can find you, read on your research. I've been dropping the website for Doug, his LinkedIn profile, his podcast that you can listen to, friends, but make sure you look him up. But Doug, make sure if I forget, you bring that back to our attention, because I want people to find out how to find you. And I also believe that you have an assessment. I don't know if that's available to us, or how we would take that assessment on our own, but I want to address that as well, if you could do that before we leave.
Okay.
So a couple of questions. Thank you all very much. I can't even begin to go back over, but if you read some of the chat, you're going to find some of the information that Doug is dropping. I want to open up for some questions. And I see, Joan, I see your hand, or is that Joanne? Excuse me for not knowing, but please unmute yourself and then ask us your question, please.
Maybe that's me. It's pronounced Jan.
Jan, thank you. I got you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Ask your question, Jan. Thank you for being on with us.
Oh, thank you for this today, both of you and all the others that are listening and learning. So here in the West, and it's not to pick on the West, but here in the West, there seems to be so much more the hang with your own mental toughness in isolation instead of doing it in a gather study without it being segued into a religion, but instead or not caring to do it via a religion, but instead doing it because the range with which, at least speaking of myself, the range with which I get to participate in the open upness of my own interpersonal helps me to get literacies experienced from many different places and peoples and situations. It's almost like being, don't find out the big secret of being, don't find out don't find out more about what you can do because of your being so curious. Don't instead learn how to be that curious person, especially from public schooling onwards. And I guess to try and form the question is, I wonder why there isn't that kind of, I guess, brave to be that way, and in essence, on the other side of it, tough-minded, by what to share and mirror in places, especially here in the West. Not really so much. It's quite hard. Anyway,
yeah,
that was it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm not sure we have a direct question. I appreciate the comments and the feedback. Yeah. I kind of gleaned about kind of holding on and trying to be tough in the dark. Thank you. Those of you that are coming on, we're running out of time, but I'm going to open and hold the doors. Doug, do you have a moment or two? I want to be respectful of your time most of all.
No, it's fine. I'm happy, Jeff.
I appreciate you very much. Mental toughness, trying to be strong in the dark. I think what I gleaned is sometimes in the Western culture, because positive self-talk, positive mental attitude is so, it's almost, well, it is, it's over $1 billion business. Everybody has a self-help book, Doug. Everybody has a self-talk. Everybody has and it can almost, the importance of it, I think, can get diluted in the what's available to people. But when I listen to you, friends in the house listening, you help me hear developing a mental toughness attitude in a whole different way, Doug, which I think is very refreshing. It's a scientific approach almost to the why I do me the way I do me. Is that accurately summed up, Doug, in your thoughts?
Oh, it is very much so. The one thing that so I risk being controversial here. The kind of the well-being and positive thinking industry is a multi-billion-pound industry, but it's based on a lot of half-baked ideas, very poorly researched ideas. So something that's very important to us is that what we present is evidence-based, that there's some science behind it. So yes, that the important thing is that we can turn to some third party, usually it's a peer review process, and say, is what we're saying valid? Is it reliable? Is there any evidence for it? I mean, I'll give you some examples. So, for example, we have this positive thinking industry, where if you understand the mental toughness concept, you can introduce positive thinking tools and techniques. And we know from all the research that they all work, but they do not all work for all people. And yet, practitioners will go out and they will go out with, here, we've got to learn about self-talk. Well, if your mental toughness profile is such that, say, you've got a low level of life control, self-talk will mean nothing to you. So what we know is the people who respond best to positive thinking tools and techniques are the people who already think positively. The people who don't think positively just don't get it. So unless you understand the individual and understand how you can get to them or help them through their developing their self-awareness to be able to be receptive to these tools and techniques, they plainly do not work.
Yes, that is so well said. I hope you heard that, friends. I'm going to get to a question. Hang on, Kip, just a second. I want to get to Alex, and I see another hand, so give me just 1 second. But Doug, you make me think, and hopefully, friends, you heard this tonight, is that helps me. I remember having a guest on, they were struggling with ADHD, and they struggled with it as a disorder, as something was wrong with them, until they discovered one day that's simply who they were. They tried all the other things from all the practitioners that said all you got to do is, but every time they tried to apply all you got to do is, it made them more frustrated than getting breakthrough. So they found that they turned what society had called their ailment, they turned it into a superpower and just simply learned how to flow in that. I said all that to say, I think those of us that are listening today, if somebody is saying all you have to do is try this and it doesn't work for you, be okay with just letting it go and determine that it didn't work for you. So yeah, very well said. Thank you. I'm going to just funnel some more questions. If you have your microphone on, if you could just mute it for me, I would really appreciate that. Alex, I see your hand. Thank you for being so patient. Come on and ask your question, please, with Doug. Thank you.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Doug. Thank you for sharing your research with us today. I do have two questions. They're kind of the same question. But what have you found in your research in the individuals who excel in the confidence piece? What are they doing to build that confidence? Because I think that that's something I struggle with personally.
Yeah, great question. Doug, go ahead.
Okay, so the kind of things that appear to work for many people, but everybody has to have their own way of getting there, is things like visualizing what success looks like, then visualizing what it feels like to be successful, and then visualizing the process. We're great believers in using visualization as a means of getting there. So, for instance, I'll give an example. At one time, when I first started out on this journey, I would be really nervous about doing a presentation like this. Now, I'm quite different. I really look forward to it, and I'm itching to get at it. But I remember a time about 40 years ago when there'd be buckets of sweat here. I'd be absolutely shaking before I'd be involved in a discussion like this. And what I was taught to do is to imagine the session going well. Imagine the session, somebody being a problem in the session. And of course, when you're doing it in your head, you can kind of stop, a bit like watching a video. You can stop the video and say, okay, what would I do at that point? Or what could I do at that point? And of course, you can actually rehearse things in your head, rehearse things that are going to be important for you, the things that you're not confident about, and take your time and work out how to do it more, differently or more effectively. So that's one approach that works. But sort of just coming back to the importance of understanding your profile in terms of the mental toughness concept, it is perfectly possible to look around the rest of your profile. I mean, one thing that we do know is that there's no such thing as a mentally tough or a mentally sensitive person. Almost all of us will have elements of mental toughness and mental sensitivity in our profile. So it is perfectly possible for you to have a comparatively low level of confidence in your abilities, but you might have a high level of achievement orientation. So somebody who understands that, a therapist or a counselor who understands that, will approach developing your confidence, not through tackling your confidence directly, but by perhaps saying, well, okay, you're somebody who likes doing things. Let's work out a plan that you're going to implement, but then let's reflect on that plan as you're doing it. And that's a way of getting to, say to somebody, well, I'm going to build you. You're not saying to them directly, I'm going to build your confidence, but you're doing it indirectly. You're using some of the advantages and the assets they've got in their profile. That's exactly why the profile is important. What we now know is that profile is not only explaining why you might struggle at times and why you might thrive at times, it's also a clue to understanding the best way to develop yourself. So, knowing that you need to improve your confidence is one thing. If we can look at your profile, we might well understand what's the best way to help you do something about your confidence.
Yeah, so beautifully put. Yeah, a great question. We're going to have time for one more, and then I've got to be respectful of our of Doug's time. Arshana, did I pronounce that correctly? I see your hand. Thank you for being so patient. Please unmute yourself and ask your question with Doug. Thank you.
Sure. My name is Arshina.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So my question is where would someone start on this process again? Because I feel like at one point I had mental toughness, but I feel like I reached a burnout point because I was not only being tough for myself, but I was being tough for everybody else as well. And that kind of was short-lived because I reached burnout, and then it turned me into more of a pessimistic person. But I do want to get back on being optimistic, feeling confident, the can-do attitude. But I don't know where to start.
Well, the starting point has to be, and I'm going to sound terribly boring because I've said it several times, it has to be self-awareness. And what we would say is it's self-awareness about your mental toughness profile. So what is it about you that describes your current state? I know mental toughness is a personality trait, but it's a state-like trait. So it can go up and down depending on circumstances. It doesn't sort of oscillate like, Maddie, you're not going to be a different person tomorrow than you were today. But if you apply lots of stress and pressure to yourself, it will eventually change things. You can be worn down. So we would say the first thing to do is understand what's going on in your head. And if you can understand what's going on in your head, you can then say, well, okay, of those things that maybe create a problem for me, which is the most important one to tackle now? Which one will give me the best response? And then ask yourself the question, do I really want to do something about it? Because the joke about, how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? One, but the light bulb's got to really want to change. That's true about all of us. We change. All of us can change, but only if we really want to do it. And you've just used a phrase that really has begun to intrigue me, and that's this notion of burnout. And if I can just take a moment, this illustrates perfectly why mental toughness is important. Because again, I'm going to be slightly controversial. There are loads and loads of programs out there on how to deal with burnout, and 50% of them are nonsense. There is a kind of a common belief that burnout is down to people working too hard, doing too much, and toppling over. Well, that's true for some people. And interestingly, if you look at it through the lens of the mental toughness concept, it applies to the mentally tough. The mentally tough are the people who think they can do it all. They don't recognize the warning signs of overload or overwork. And the first they know about it is when they topple over. That's burnout. The mentally sensitive burn out for an entirely different reason. The mentally sensitive can burn out with perfectly ordinary, even low workloads, because a mentally sensitive person will tend to worry about something before they do it. They'll tend to use a lot of emotional energy, a lot of mental energy. If they're asked to do something, they might spend days, weeks worrying about it before they actually get to the job. If they use up all their mental and emotional energy before they get to a job, even a small task can topple them over. So burnout depends on what causes you to burn out depends on your mental toughness. Now, what does that mean for developing or doing something about burnout? Well, the stock answer in most programs is go and take a break, relax, switch off, take a bit of pressure off yourself, recharge your battery. That works for a mentally tough individual. If you ask a worrying, mentally sensitive person, go and take a week off, go and sit on a beach in Hawaii somewhere, what are they going to do for the week? They're going to worry. And so the solution for a mentally sensitive person is different to a solution for a mentally tough person. And yet, if you look at all those burnout programs, they're only offering one solution or a narrow range of solutions, and they're not taking into account who you are.
So well said. I don't know about the rest of you, but I think we're going to have Doug back for part 2. Anybody in the house would love to have this gentleman come back on. I don't know if that's an option for you, Doug, but by the show of the hearts and the appreciation for you tonight, we would love to have you come back on.
I'd be very pleased to. I'm very pleased to.
I would love it. I have just one follow-up I want to get to Alex, and then I want you to have just a closing thought, direction to a resource that we could start there, Doug. Alex was following up with your comment about visualization. Could you help somebody that really doesn't know what they specifically want? So they're not quite sure how to visualize what they want if they don't know what they want? Does that make sense? Could you give us any guidance or kind of direction on where to start?
Well, I personally would use an approach that's a little bit like a SWOT analysis. Identifying what you're good at, identifying what you think you're not so good at, and then turning that conversation around to what implication has that got for your life now, and from that move to what would you like to do differently? What would you like to do better? Because very often people who lack a sense of purpose or don't have goals don't know how to form the goals. So what we're doing there is getting them to think about, well, what are the fundamentals behind purpose? It's about doing something that really matters to me, that will make a difference to me or perhaps to other people. And if it matters and I begin to buy into that, then maybe I'll be able to articulate that, translate that into goals, translate that into a plan. But you need to it's a bit like creating self-awareness about your mental toughness. It's about creating awareness about what you're doing with your life.
Yeah. Sometimes I think you resonate with me, Doug. Sometimes I think because we live in a very labeling visual society, meaning a diagnosis, a finding, when we go, oh, everything I'm doing now has to fit within that mold. Take visualization, for example. Okay, I don't really know what I want, so I was said that I have to visualize what I want, so that must mean visualization doesn't work. It's not that. It's just remember that all of these are tools. And I think finding us in the midst of the tool and allow the tool to flow with us rather than us trying to form into it, it actually takes form of us as we journey through this process. That kind of takes the load off of having to feel like I have to do it exactly right to get the results that I want. Does that make sense, Doug? That's kind of what I felt when you were saying that.
Absolutely, Ben. And you know, there are loads and loads of quotes, especially, I can't remember, Jordan, the basketball player, talks about getting, you know, tens of thousands of things wrong before he got it right. I think a lot of people don't appreciate that making mistakes is just a normal part of life. Not getting it right first time is a normal part of life. If it was, we would all be superheroes.
Yes. I'm dropping that in the chat. Making mistakes. If you don't take anything else with you tonight, friends, making mistakes is a normal part of life. Let's be easier on ourselves. Let's not be so judgmental. Let's not be so hard on ourselves. And become, the other thing I'm taking with me tonight, friends, is becoming self-aware, tuning into me, how I feel, how I think, how I react to different situations. That becomes my starting point in order to continue to develop in my mental toughness. Doug, one last thought from you to the group, a word of encouragement, advice, a resource that we can point to. I just dropped your website in the chat one more time for us, Doug. Is there any other additional resources that people can find you at?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm happy for people to know my email address, which is very straightforward. It's Doug, DOUG, at aqr.co.uk. And we haven't had a chance to talk about the psychometric measure, but there is now a very valid and reliable, it is very high quality psychometric measure that enables people to get a better understanding of their mental toughness profile. No psychometric measure is perfect, but this is a major tool in helping you to understand yourself, or if you're a practitioner, helping you to understand other people and helping them to understand themselves.
Yes. And is that an assessment that's available on your website, Doug?
It is. And we are in the process of setting up a capability in the United States and in Canada to enable people to be trained to use it if that's what they want to do with it. So,
yeah. So well said. I did just drop your email in the chat, friends. Make sure you copy it down right away. When we close out our room, we close out and that chat goes away. So please grab Doug's email, reach out to him. If nothing else, also but to share your appreciation for him on the Circles app tonight. Doug, out of all of the guests that I've had, I believe that this was probably right up there with enriching, with informative. I hear the passion in you. It sounds very much like you have found your purpose and your calling. It comes through very bright. And we are so honored again to have you on the Circles Masterclass tonight. Thank you again.
No, thank you, Jeff. Thank you for your kind words. And you are right. I really believe in this. So,
yeah, we hear that in your voice. And part two, friends, be looking out for part two. We're going to have Doug back. Friends, can you show some love in the house one more time for our special guest? Please visit his website. Yay. Go ahead. Somebody's giving you a shout out. Go ahead. I love it.
Yay. Woo,
thank you.
Woo, woo.
I love it. All right. I'll tell you what, on a count of three, everybody's going to just don't scream real loud so you break our eardrums. But on the count of three, unmute yourselves, all of you, and just give a big woo woo. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go.
Come back.
Thank you.
Yes, part two.
I love it.
Nearly 1:30 in the morning here. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to sleep now.
1:30 in the morning from the UK. Doug, we appreciate you. Well wishes to you, your family, your work. We look forward to having you again. Friends, you've been listening to the Masterclass Right Here in Circles. I'm Jeff, your host. Thank you for gracing us with your presence tonight. You make this all possible. Go in peace, be well, and we'll see you again right here on the Circles app. Good night, everybody.
Good night, Jeff. Good night,
Good
everyone.
night, Doug. Thank you.